everybody. Happy Tuesday, and welcome to another episode of The Healing Home. I'm your host, Michelle, and today we are joined again with the fabulous Mario Garza of Symbolic Studies.
Hey, hey.
What's up, babe? How you doing?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
I'm doing great.
Nice.
Yeah, as you have been. I've been looking forward to this conversation again.
I know. We pretty much made the call after the
Yes.
last one that we were going to do it again because I got a lot out of it. I received a lot of comments just from all over the place, and people had some interesting things to say. They contributed in a way that I'm like, this facilitates another conversation. So here we are.
Yeah, it was pretty clear to me as well by the end of the talk that we needed to come back to this subject, revisit it, because after the show, as we usually do, we reconvened in the living room and discussed how everything went, and we went on for another hour or two about
Yeah.
things that we wanted to say or other thoughts that we had. And you've just been deep into Saturn because we're in Capricorn season, so
Right.
it wasn't even our plan to do this. I was going to be doing a tooth powder tutorial today.
Right.
But last week when we were talking, I'm like, I think we need to do Saturn instead, and so here we are.
Yes.
Again, for part 2 of the lost lore of Saturn. So before we get started into everything, I want to say hello to everybody in the chat.
Hello, chat.
Everybody who's listening on Symbolic Studies, YouTube, and Twitter as well. Welcome into the Healing Home. Thanks for being here, everybody. We appreciate you. And I want to give you a chance, as always, to introduce yourself a little bit. For anybody who may not know you, I'm pretty sure everybody listening probably does, but let's just do a proper introduction and allow you to let everybody know where they can find you. And if you have anything that you want to start this conversation off with, the floor is yours.
Many thanks.
Yeah.
So symbolicstudies.com is where people can find me. I'm available for tarot readings and study sessions and design work too. I feel like I haven't been mentioning that enough lately, but I've been working with some really great people on some pretty awesome projects that I'm very excited about. And so, those things will all kind of come to light at some point. But if people have a small business or something that they're working on and they want to collaborate, they can reach out. But yeah, I'm a graphic designer. I follow the signs and try and produce content during each sign, So right now I've been kind of re-editing our Saturn videos and Capricorn videos and putting those out and putting out memes and things like that. And so this is probably, I feel like I finally have to look like in my calendar or emails or something to find out when Symbolic Studies officially started. But I've been doing this for like 4 or 5 years, basically, but been more so public with it the last 3 years, I would say.
Right. That sounds about right to me.
Yeah. So I come from a symbology background, I guess you can say, because that was really what got me to want to start putting out content, was learning so much about symbolism that I felt like I was consuming a lot, not putting out a lot. And so Symbolic Studies was kind of born from there. And the name goes back to me wanting to be a perpetual student and then help people along their sort of symbolic path as well. So, but yeah, every single year, there's just like a new wrinkle or a new layer with a planet or a constellation or some sort of mythology that really, presents itself and kind of like steps up my understanding of what it's all about. And this year, I would say Libra came through pretty strong for me in a unique new way. And I feel like a lot of this Saturnian business is kind of coming through in a newer way for me, at least. Or at least a lot of the things that I had learned maybe a couple years ago has really come into focus, and I have a much better understanding of what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, I'll say even just observing you and being with you all the time, I feel as though 2023, and now we're moving into the calendar year of 2024, was a really revelatory year in a lot of ways. But I think for you, in the sense of the way you're approaching these signs, the way you're putting together pieces that you've gathered over the years and the connecting dots and stuff, I feel like it was a really big year for that. And so I'm not surprised that here we are with the lost lore of Saturn. If just
Right.
the way that things have been going for you with your studies and everything else. So there's been a huge leveling up, I would say.
Yeah, no, I would say so too. And I mentioned this last time, but putting out information, one of the biggest gifts of doing that is the information you receive, in
Mm.
return. And
Mm-hmm.
so I put out a meme a few days ago on Instagram, and I got some very thoughtful, comments and feedback and insights from people. And I'm like, man, I was like, that's just amazing to me. It's kind of just this thing where you put something out, and then literally within hours, my understanding of what I just put out like increases, like doubles or triples or whatever, just from what people are sending me.
Yeah.
So that's been really cool. And I, and yourself, I've always been a admirer of Saturn, I would say, and that's one of the planets we bonded on. I'm a Cancer, for those of you guys who don't know, and then Michelle's a Capricorn, and so we are, on opposite ends of the ecliptic. And when I found that out, I thought that was really interesting. And then I feel like we've both kind of, just through our relationship, we've both gravitated towards largely similar things. We have our differences of opinion, but a lot of the things that I've always found interesting about Saturn or astrology seems to resonate with you, kind of even with like films and things like that, liking kind of like darker, grittier types of movies and whatnot. You've always been on board.
Yeah, definitely. And I feel like we've talked about this too, but just experience in life as well, I think, has always kind of had me riding on this line of Saturn and being open to darker things, or having experiences that have shown me that the dark stuff is real and it's there, and it's not that it needs to be covered up, it's just that it needs to be understood, so that you don't get yourself caught in it in a way that's going to where you're going to lose yourself
There's
in
yeah,
it. You know what I mean?
yeah.
And so I think that that's been something we've bonded over, I think, because of just those outlooks on life in general as well.
Yeah. No,
Yeah.
definitely, it's true.
Yeah.
So, where do you want to begin? I have a few thoughts. So
Yeah.
there's a few things related to Saturn, the name Saturn, that I kind of feel like is worth exploring a little bit. But maybe just a brief recap of our last chat.
That's a good idea. I think let's do the recap, and then I like the idea of going into the name of Saturn, because it
Yeah.
kind of can set the tone for some people that may want to know a little bit more about the etymology
Right,
and what
right.
that might mean.
Totally. So to recap what we talked about last time, essentially, I feel like I brought up the idea that Saturn was the sort of primary planet, the ruling planet of the last golden age.
Mm-hmm.
And that this last golden age was, you could say, Hyperborean in nature. You could say it's in line with the polar tradition or the northern tradition. I also call it the stellar tradition as well, which we'll be getting into a little bit more. And so this idea that Saturn ruled this golden age, and this other idea that we put forward was that there was, I feel like I'm still choosing almost the right words to kind of convey this, but there are certainly cultures that viewed Saturn as being very feminine or kind of mercurial, actually, where it was always in balance, and that there is both this masculine and feminine component to Saturn. And so some of the comments that I received since the last chat and after putting out some of these memes have been people saying that when they acknowledge it from an astrological perspective, they do view it as this kind of androgynous planet that is both masculine and feminine. And so when you look at it through that lens, I think that's very interesting, because to say something is androgynous or is both masculine and feminine, I think that's fine. But I think also, too, that means that there's a third sort of element, And so this is kind of the case with Mercury, too. So Mercury being the divine androgyne, but there's also a third aspect to Mercury as well. And so there's a triune nature to Mercury. And, God, some of the chats that I've had with Lucas, LC King, he brings up this fact all the time, the triune nature of God. And a lot of my research in symbolism right now has been looking at kind of a triune sort of system here in terms of symbolic ages. And so, what I've noticed over time is that a lot of people obviously have an understanding of solar symbolism. And in fact, a lot of people think that solar symbolism is kind of like the end all be all system, I suppose, or the end all be all framework to interpret symbolism. And I think that's more of a modern construct. And so, from what I gather, a big portion of what we talked about last time and we'll be continuing to talk about today is the fact that it seems to me like there have been three major symbolic ages, and I'm tracking this with everything that I'm reading right now. And any author that's talking about this, I'm really interested in right now. And I feel really lucky and fortunate to have come across a few authors in particular that talk about this very explicitly. So this isn't my sort of new idea. This isn't something that I put together. It's something that I've understood over time, especially coming from more of like a symbology background. And now it's just really coming to fruition. It's really coming into focus. It's crystallizing.
Yeah.
And so we currently live in a solar age. Previous to that, there was a lunar age. Previous to that, it was a polar age or a stellar age. And so Saturn relates to this earliest age. And so this early age really was more unified. And there was a strong tradition there. And it has to do with the center, or what I'm reading now by an author. He refers to it as the supreme center, right? So there was this holistic sort of core, right? This could be the monad, this could be God, this could be source, whatever you want to call it. I very much think of the sort of interior of like a torus field, right? I think that's kind of an overlapping sort of symbol, I think, with all of this. And so Saturn corresponded with this earlier age. And at some point, its energy kind of became inverted, or it got distorted, or it flipped. Kind of the new wrinkle since our last chat is this idea that, and I don't know if I said this last time, but it seems as though Saturn, being the oldest planet, if you go by the 7 traditional planetary system, which I generally follow as kind of my main way of looking at everything, and the reason why, I don't know if I said this last time either, but it's like there's 7 days of the week, 7 colors of the rainbow, 7 musical scales. If there were more days to the week or more musical scales or more colors to the rainbow, I think I would maybe consider incorporating some of these outer planets in my like core research. But the number 7 is really sort of important here, for a lot of different reasons. And so Saturn would be like the 7th planet out, right? So this slow lumbering planet. What I think part of the symbolism of Saturn is that it's old enough to have gone through this transition. If it's the oldest planet, then that means that it's almost like the firstborn in a family or something, where it's like the firstborn child is going to be the one that kind of initiates all of these things for the other children. They're going to be the first one to go through these different steps in life, right? To go through puberty, to go through whatever, to get married, to have a child, all these different types of things. So for that young family, the first child, the oldest child, is going to be the first one that goes through all of these big steps, right? So typically, right? Yeah, generally, yeah.
But I get what you're saying.
Things are very different now.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
true.
yeah.
Right. And so, then it's going to be the first one to reach middle age.
Yes.
And then it's going to be the first one to reach, their elder years. And if it's a woman, it's going to be the first one to go through menopause and, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's what Saturn represents. I think Saturn represents the first planet to have gone through this huge transition over time in a lot of ways. So what we mentioned was that during the golden age, during this northern age, which I can go on about, there's so many tangents that are really fascinating here, but the fact that Saturn was associated with this golden age is very interesting, because it seems as though the symbolism related to Saturn was way more positive. And so Saturn was viewed in a more positive light, I
Mm.
think. And then nowadays, it's considered to be very malefic, right? So very heavy and dark and things like that. So much so that people don't really want anything to kind of do with it, and they're not really respecting or admiring the components that are necessary here that are Saturnian. And so I see that this sort of change with Saturn has existed potentially on multiple different levels. That it was more feminine and then became more masculine, and then it was more positive and benefic, and now it's more malefic, and now it's more evil. So I think that's all really fascinating. But that's kind of the main sort of thing that we put out there generally. I know there's a lot of other tangents, that we ended up talking about and stuff, but that was kind of the bulk of it, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good overview. And for anyone who didn't hear that, part one, you can find that on Symbolic Studies YouTube. You can find it here on the Healing Home YouTube as well. So,
Yeah.
you could go back and review it because there's a lot of gems in there. And I think that was a pretty good overview of where we were at. I really just wanted to drop in, though, that Ursa Major,
Oh, yeah.
The connection with Ursa Major and it actually, they actually being a scythe. And it being looked at as a scythe and the whole thing with harvesting and that stuff, which lends more credit to it being feminine, in my opinion, with harvest and
Right.
birth and death and stuff like that, which we'll probably get into a little bit more tonight. But I feel like that's a really great
Yeah.
place. So
Yeah. I mean, I can just expand on that and then I'll get into some of the other stuff.
Okay.
So what I brought up was that apparently there were some cultures that viewed Ursa Major, which, when we talk about these three major traditions, the point of focus shifts over time. And there's three different types of time that I believe we're dealing with here as well. So in the current solar age, people are focused on the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun, and when people refer to the sky clock, they're largely referring to the sun. And so when you have your birthday, people say, one more trip around the sun, right?
Yeah.
I think that's an inversion, because I don't think that we are going around the sun.
Right.
And so a lot of these things, by the way, I just have to mention Saturn being feminine, then masculine, Saturn being evil nowadays, but once being viewed as more positive, the shifting of the center changing and everything else. A lot of this stuff, from what I'm gathering and picking up, this is a matter of perspective shifting, not actually Saturn potentially having changed its energy, although I'm open to that because, again, it is an aged planet.
Right.
It's gone through things, it's seen things, it's experienced things. It almost, to me, symbolically, it kind of almost looks like the rings of Saturn are symbolic of its old age. It's almost like an old man growing a really big beard or something, or it's almost like a king, a prince finally becoming a king and now having a crown or something like that.
Right.
That
Yeah.
This ringed business seems like it's symbolic of its advanced age in some way, shape, or form, right? And so that's kind of how I personally see it. And so Saturn, is associated with the sickle and is associated with the scythe, and Ursa Major. So, sorry. When it comes to time, people are in the solar age, they're looking at the sun, the ecliptic, they're looking at the planets, their transitions and everything else. They're acknowledging the constellations and what constellation is behind the sun, right? And so that is the solar age. And even we have a 24-hour day. And the number 12, if you look at it in a normal clock, you're going to see 12 numbers, right? 12 is a solar number. And so that is like something that many, many people have said over time. It makes a lot of sense that would be the case. So 12 is a solar number. Previous to that, this lunar age, they were looking at the moon as being the primary timekeeper, the primary sky clock. And so they were following lunar time, right? And as I mentioned, there's still cultures that view the moon as being the primary timekeeper as well, right? So they're
Right.
going based off of lunar cycles. That's why their holidays don't repeat on the same day year after year. Um, During the polar age or northern age or hyperborean age, which it's all the same thing, the stellar age, they were more so concerned, based on my understanding, on the fixed stars. And so, not the wandering stars of the planets, not the constellations around the ecliptic or the sun itself, but they were paying attention to Ursa Major and Ursa Minor going around the pole star. That was the primitive sky clock. So my understanding is that that was the original sky clock, actually. So during this early age, the northern sky played a way more prominent role than what it's known for today, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so actually, I just read a couple of things from different authors because I'm tracking all this information, where the authors explicitly talk about the influence of the zodiac and where the symbolism of the zodiac actually comes from. And so my personal hunch, and this has been my hunch for a while, and I've made videos on several signs where this to me seems to be like kind of clearly the case, that the signs themselves, the 12 signs of the zodiac, or the 13 signs if you want to roll that way,
Mm-hmm.
which I have no problem with. I'm not really dogmatic with
Right.
systems and things like that.
Yeah.
You know, I kind of want to learn all of
Flexible.
it. Yeah, I'm very flexible that way. But the actual signs of the zodiac, according to Rene Guénon, who I shouted out last time, I'm going through his book called Fundamental Symbols. Sometimes I believe it's called Sacred Symbols or Symbols in the Sacred Science or something along these lines. Absolutely fantastic. It's one of the best reads. It's one of the best books that I've come across that very clearly talks about world axis symbolism, polar symbolism, all these types of things. It's blowing me away, actually, where I'm like, holy cow, this guy, I've been looking for you, dude. It's kind of how it feels, you know? And so Rene Guénon, he basically talks about how the signs of the zodiac, the influence of their symbolism goes back to the northern sky.
Ah.
And so this is the transference that has happened from polar to solar, is that a lot of symbolism
Hmm.
that was connected to the polar tradition, which is the northern tradition, which has way more of a focus connected to the northern sky and earth, and arguably I think was way more feminine as well, that a lot of that core symbolism over the ages shifted to a solar sort of understanding. So a lot of the symbolism related to the world axis, related to the North Star, Ursa Major, things like that, that information and that reverence later on was transferred over to the ecliptic and the 12 signs of the zodiac. Rene Guénon says this. I've been waiting for someone, a reputable person, or anyone, I guess, to say it. And I'm like, exactly right. You know, the people I talk to about this kind of stuff, this has come up in conversation.
Right.
And I've never thought that it didn't seem right or that there wasn't something there. So I feel like I'm on a mission, actually, to at some point completely cover in all the ways the 12 signs of the zodiac relate back to the pole, because that is my understanding.
Dude.
And this whole entire idea basically makes sense when you understand that everything comes from the supreme center and everything returns to the supreme center. And that's just how I personally see it. I'm not the only one. This isn't my brand new idea once again. Because all centers are related to each other, and it reminds me of just a great toroidal field, basically.
Right.
You know, so everything coming from a center and then ultimately returning to it. So Rene Guénon has talked about this. I'm going to do more research because he's a very prolific writer. He's written a lot of stuff. See what else he has to say about that. But in another work that I've been thumbing through, Galactic Alignment by John Major Jenkins, he says, as an example, that the ancient Chinese, that 5,000 years ago, he said around the time when the I Ching was being created or developed, that they saw 8 constellations around the pole star, and that these 8 constellations related to the 8 trigrams of the I Ching. And so I'm not going to get into the whole I Ching system, but it's a very interesting system. Has to do with 8 trigrams. You combine these trigrams, you create 64 hexagrams. This is a binary system composed of yin and yang, okay? And so he says that they saw 8 constellations around the pole star, one for each trigram, and he said that that was their understanding and that was their system in the polar age. We're talking about the golden age, or we're talking about the hyperborean age. And there's a lot of other ancient Chinese symbolism that I've come across where they have a reverence for the dippers and their sages, you know, or at least one mythology, their sages coming from the north, you know. And so he said what happened was that there was a large shift over time. And he said the shift was as things became more solar, that those 8 constellations that represented the 8 trigrams in the northern sky, that the symbolism of those 8 trigrams shifted over to the path of the ecliptic, which is the path of the sun, and they added 4 more constellations, giving us 12 constellations, giving us the 12 constellations of the zodiac, basically. So it seems as though a lot of systems originated from the north, and that there is something to be said about humanity having some sort of Arctic origin, and also there being a pole shift with that, a shift away from the north.
Right.
And so here's just 2 examples of 2 different authors saying that the symbolism of the zodiac comes from the north, essentially, originated at the north, pretty much. And so this is the big shift from the center symbolically being in the northern sky, or at the very least along the world axis, which has a connection to the North Pole, right?
Mm-hmm.
From that being the center to now the sun, as an example, being a center. So now we revolve around the sun, not the other way around.
Right.
You know, in the minds of most people.
Right.
Yeah. So that's what I think. Probably a lot of the zodiac signs. I mean, I'm just going to say all of the zodiac signs. I think that they're all symbolically veiled references to this earlier age, to this earlier system, which was more concentrated around the northern sky. And so I've made videos about this, how it relates to Aquarius, you know, because Aquarius corresponds, and this is a perfect segue with everything we're talking about, but Aquarius corresponds to the star card. The star card, the star in question, is the pole star, right? And so it's the pole star. Generally, what you're going to see is one main star surrounded by 7 other stars. And it's a woman at night preparing a ritual bath. She's nude, right? This corresponds to the polar tradition. This is the northern tradition. Back in the day, Aquarius corresponded with Saturn.
Right.
It was ruled by Saturn.
Right.
So isn't that kind of interesting?
Yep.
You know, and it's also interesting to think too that Saturn literally has urn, right, which is a vessel.
Yep.
And Aquarius symbolism has to do with vessels.
Right. And you can't deny the vessel being feminine, receptive.
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
She receives. The woman is receiving.
Right.
You know?
Exactly right. 100%. So we'll get into Saturn stuff, but I'll complete my thought. I know I kind of went on a few different tangents there, but Kali, you mentioned Kali.
Yes.
Right. So when you see Kali, it's not uncommon for her to have a blade with her. And it is actually at the end of the blade, there's this little hook kind of at the end of the blade. And for my research, a lot of curved blades, there's a blade associated with Set. It's called the Iron of Set. And I'm not even going to say it. I've done research on this blade so many times, and I always forget how the blade is spelled. It's like Kofesh, I believe.
Okay.
And so this blade, it's fairly straight, and then there's this kind of hook at the end, you know. And according to my research, this blade literally was intended to be a substitute symbol for Ursa Major. That the little dip in the blade is literally it's the dip in the dipper.
Okay.
You know.
Mm-hmm.
And so the sickle you can almost imagine, if you're familiar with these constellations enough, you can almost imagine that Ursa Major kind of does look like a sickle,
Right.
and I could almost see a scythe in there too, to be honest, right? And so when I see that blade that Kali is holding, it does remind me very much of Ursa Major. It makes me wonder if actually that is kind of the correspondence there. So I think at some point what I'll probably do is get some of that imagery together, get some of these other blades together, and then just kind of show them and maybe pull out some quotes from the books that I've read this information from, and just say, hey, you know what? I know it's, to me, I was blown away. I was like, wait, this blade is an Ursa Major symbol. That seems kind of strange. But when you think about it, it actually makes a lot of sense.
Right.
And so, yeah, so you can almost imagine these two constellations going around the pole star, that it's two blades. And as I mentioned last time, the blade really truly has an esoteric symbolic correspondence with woman, and with kind of the Dark Mother and everything else. So it all kind of just fits that way.
Yeah, well, and then so heading more in towards the etymology
Yeah.
of the word, what comes to mind too, to connect it more to Ursa Major, the turning of the cosmos, is the word turn that's in Saturn. So, what
That's a good one.
that's implied
That's great, yeah.
within the word itself, that there is some sort of turning happening. And most people who understand how we can't, I guess, claim to understand how the world works. But from what I gather, and what I believe is that obviously change is constant and it's always turning. The wheel is always turning. The cosmic wheel is always turning. Your wheels hopefully are always turning. And it's just how it is. And so to me, it kind of points more to the primordial aspects of Saturn and it being more of the origin point.
I love that. I love the turn. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. It's actually really funny because when people break it down, I don't know if I've ever heard anyone bring up the turn part.
It literally just came to me as we're talking.
And earn are the parts that I always kind of like think about personally.
Right. Same. But as we're talking, I'm like, wait a second, turn. Like, to everything, turn. That is the whole thing. It's like because it does. So that's one that I'd like to dig a little deeper on too.
Well, okay. So the whole thing, in my opinion, when it comes to cosmography, the debate has been for a long time: is it flat? Is it round? What's going on?
Mm-hmm.
I almost feel like that actual conversation, flat versus round, it doesn't really complete the picture of what the conversation's about.
I would agree.
And it's actually kind of a cul-de-sac sort of thing.
Yeah.
And so what I think personally is that a lot of this conversation truly hinges on what's turning.
Yes.
As in what's spinning, right? And so what is actually spinning here is the earth underneath your feet spinning and rotating and revolving and hurling through space? Or is the sky above your head, is that what is turning? Is that what causes the fixed stars to go around the pole star,
right,
throughout the year? What's actually turning? And there might actually be a couple of different sort of hinges up there, because the pole star could be a hinge, and then I think there's something to be said about the sun also having its influence on the planets. And so that's one way of looking at it.
Right.
Is that the fixed stars go around Polaris, but the planets actually go around the sun. And so, but what I don't think is that we are going around something. Not at the very least, if that's the sort of argument or whatever, it doesn't appear as though we're moving around anything discernible. I think that that's kind of wool that's being pulled over our eyes. I think that this is one of the inversions, and this inversion, it makes perfect sense when we're talking about a polar age versus the current solar age. That's what we're talking about too. We're talking about in the polar age, there is the world axis that everything revolves around. And so there's a point of pivot for everything, to the heavens, you know. There is something to be said about the earth also turning as well. That there is this idea that even though what's moving up there, that there are things that kind of move down here. People move. There's, you know,
Oceans and
oceans and
tides and
weather and, you know, all that kind of stuff.
right.
And so there is something to be said about that. But I'm more interested in the symbolism of the cosmos actually turning or churning or spinning, basically. And so during the heliocentric age, the solar age, everything revolves around the sun, you know. And so that's kind of been one of the major shifts as well, from this being, you know, close to the center of everything to now the center of everything being millions or billions of miles away or light years away or something like that. So isn't that interesting? That was something I brought up last time too. You know, this idea of the center, the supreme center, the cosmic center, in the earlier ages, it was much closer, much closer. In today's world, it's so far away. It's like unfathomably far away,
Right.
according to the numbers that we're given and everything else. So what Rene Guénon says, which I think is very, very interesting, is he essentially says that the supreme center, and I don't know if I mentioned this last time, but that the supreme center literally is lost or hidden during the Dark Ages. That is what is missing here. This supreme center, this cosmic center, the world axis, knowledge of it, being able to understand it conceptually, spiritually, all of these different types of things, understanding its implications, understanding how unified it is, you know, all of these things. That's what he says is the main factor in a dark age, is that the supreme center is nowhere to be found, basically.
Wow. Interesting.
Yeah. And so that's why for me, I mean, I'm just not surprised. I guess I shouldn't be, but part of me, I do kind of get a little surprised, I suppose, when I think about how few people are interested in this, you know, because it unlocks so many things. It's unlocked a lot of things for me, and it's really, it's unlocked a lot of symbolic truths, because so many symbols go back to this world axis. So many symbols go back to this original age. So going back to Saturn, so Saturn, right? So even turn. So right? So
Yeah.
as in urn. Is a very interesting sound. And you're once you pay attention to it, it's in a lot of words, right? So Saturn, Ursa major, Ursa minor, father, mother, sister. There's a royal, one of the oldest games ever is called the Royal Game of Another fellow I'm tracking right now who was interested in polar symbolism, who was heavily influenced by Guénon. He belonged to a group called the Group.
Really?
Yes. And so there's even a people that are the people, and there's a land called There's a lot of things when you look at it. I'm sure people in the chat, you know, I know there's a few people who probably know a bit about it.
Oh, yeah.
But when you look into it, it means primordial. It means original. It means like there's this sort of original kind of like generative kind of thing that comes along with it, like a Genesis sort of thing, you know. But basically, it means like the earliest.
I was just gonna say earliest. Well, and then that it reminds me of how you're mentioning it: mother, father, daughter, brother, sister. It's like that's the family unit.
Yeah, right.
That is
the
primordial.
There you go.
You know, root of what's going on here.
I've even read that an old name for Earth,
right,
was Earth, but like spelled differently. That not EAR, but it's the same thing. It's
right.
the same thing. Phonetically it's the same thing, right?
Right.
And so really has this root to it,
wow.
Right? And so Saturn, being right there makes perfect sense.
Dude, whoa, this one for some reason is striking a chord pretty deep. Okay, this is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So Saturn, relating to Aquarius, relating to the star card, relating to the polar tradition, the northern tradition, right? Even there are other words that are not you are, but just like with Earth, right, or sister or brother, that you can replace the vowel. And so a lot of people know that when you're looking into etymology and you're kind of like being, if you're looking into like just like wordplay and the origin of words and stuff like that, that substituting the vowel is kind of a common sort of thing that you can do. And so there's a lot of words actually that are ar, r, or ir, ear,
Yeah.
or or I believe or as well, or that go back to the north. So my understanding is that like Aryan, that actually is a reference to a northern Arctic origin. And so the Arctic, that's a reference to this same exact sort of thing. Even I'm not the first one to point this out, but King Arthur, that Arthur goes back to this as well. And so I believe that that's a reference to the bear too. So Ursa, once
I was
again.
going to say, yeah.
Yeah. So there's a lot of words. I would probably guess Ireland,
Yeah.
that there's a lot of things like that where when you really get to the root of it, ear, that there is a northern sort of original kind of correspondence there, because that's what actually represents.
Well, and the runes are coming to mind.
Urus.
Right. So we're talking also about even just phonetically when hearing it, hearing the sound is very similar to the Northern European, Scandinavian languages when you're saying
Yes.
these words and just that kind of tone of how it comes off of the tongue.
Yeah.
So another thing to just think about and
Right.
lending more credit to the northern origins of things, perhaps.
Oh, yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
100%.
Mhm.
So once you know this, you just, once again, you'll see it all over the place, and you'll realize how many things actually kind of go back to it. So that's one example. So Saturn, the other thing I think about, and as you mentioned too, it's very feminine, an urn, a vessel, right? And part of the conversation was Saturn feminine?
Right.
Which appears that the answer is at the very least, yeah, and it was feminine and masculine at the very least,
Right.
But there are some explicit feminine Saturnian symbols out there and deities and things like that, like Kali. Some people that reply to some of my memes and videos and stuff have said that Kali is the correspondence, but some people have said that she's just the feminine Saturnian correspondence. That there's there's a male deity that's also Saturnian who's associated with the crow, and so she might just be the feminine aspect, right? The dark primordial feminine aspect of Saturn.
Yeah.
Which reminds me of Sat. Okay, so Sat, I think that's kind of interesting. So urn being feminine, and then Sat, to sit, is actually very feminine. So this is something that I've mentioned before in other videos, and I feel like I might do a presentation at some point because I've talked about it so many times. But my very strong hunch, and based on research, is that sitting down is actually more of a feminine thing to do, and that it's more passive, right? So it reminds me, as an example, of like a queen bee, and how the queen bee stays in the hive and she has all these other bees go out and do the work for her. And then obviously she does her own work too, but they come back, they bring the pollen, all this stuff. The whole hive revolves around the queen. The original, in my opinion, the original throned goddess is a woman. The original throne deity is the goddess, rather.
Right.
And so I think that there is a lot of information out there that essentially kind of backs this up. And so that this idea of a queen's throne predates a king's throne, and that a king being throned and a king sitting down that you're essentially, in my opinion, you're just emulating the queen.
Right.
And so the bridal chair is a symbolic sort of overlap with all of this stuff, right? So sitting down, it means that you're more passive. So that's more of a feminine thing, passivity, right? And this isn't negative, so even when I say the opposite, being active, it's not necessarily positive either.
Right.
There's a it's a neutral sort of thing, right? And so a woman can rule from the confines of her kingdom or castle or whatever, right? It's more of a man's duty symbolically, traditionally, to go out and travel, bring home the bacon, if you will.
Yeah, right.
A woman can be domestic and she's moving mountains,
right,
because she's raising children, she's taking care of the home, she's, cooking, and she's doing all of these different traditional sorts of things. So on a traditional symbolic level, the throne and the bridal chair are completely related to each other, I would say. And that when you think about sitting, it's more passive. In today's world, we have a lot of people sitting down for their jobs, right?
Yes.
More than ever before.
Yeah, I would say so.
So because we have computers and all this other stuff, right?
Yeah.
And so more and more people are sitting down. I would say that this is in line with the sort of feminization of man.
Right.
And that men are becoming more effeminate. Well, if you're sitting in a chair and you're playing, I'm not hating on anyone's activities or hobbies or whatever.
Right.
Been there, done that. I have stuff I need to work on. But if you're sitting down behind a computer, or you're sitting down and you're playing games, or you're sitting down and you're watching movies all day long, yeah, you're probably going to be more effeminate,
right?
And your children, if the lifestyle continues, you're also going to be more effeminate.
Well, and we're seeing that in real time happen.
Well, yeah, I was going to say.
So it's almost like, no judgment at all, but it's just like, the proof is in the pudding kind of thing. Calling a spade, basically.
And here we are, we're sitting right now,
right in front of a computer, and exactly. So
right.
It's like we understand.
But I'm just saying symbolically,
right?
Sitting is actually more feminine. Okay,
right.
So sat. So sat, it's the past tense of sit.
Right.
So there's even like almost, when you look at it that way, there's almost this like passage of time in a way, having sat down.
Right.
Now, what I want to bring up is the fact that it's really interesting that the devil card corresponds with Capricorn, which is ruled by Saturn.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm thinking of like the Rider-Waite version of the card. He is sitting on a black monolith, right? And so he's actually squatting on a monolith,
right?
Which is one way to sit or be passive, to be at rest, right? To kind of be fixed, right? And so I'm in the midst right now of writing a post about why the devil squats.
Yeah.
And so it's interesting that the devil is squatting. It's also interesting, and this isn't always the case. Some older decks, he's not squatting, he's standing. But there are decks where he is sitting down or he's squatting. It's interesting to me that, what was I just going to say? It was something related to sitting, Saturn, all of the different things that come with squatting. Like what does squatting mean symbolically?
Well, I mean, it's pretty primordial too.
Exactly.
And that's one of the, and we've talked about this, but it's a birthing position as well. It's an, multiple cultures, that is their way to actually sit and relax and eat and gather. Anyone who does yoga knows that there's a pose that it's called garland pose sometimes, and now the other name is escaping me, but when you're in that sitting position and your elbows are connected to your knees and your hands are at your heart and you are squatted down.
Yeah, I think sometimes it's called a yoga squat.
Yeah, they'll call it that too, but there is another name that it's...
Oh, yeah, they
whatever.
all have...
They have, multiple names. But either way, it's a very primal... comfortable position if you're in shape and you're flexible. You know what I mean? So I feel like it's another sign to me that that's a natural position for all people to be in. Mm-hmm. But because we have digressed from these more primordial practices the sacred centers, the this is and the that's is, it's actually not as easy for a lot of people to get in these positions anymore because we're
Right.
not well versed and practiced in it unless you go out of your way and you make it a point to be practicing these things.
Right.
Whereas it could have been part of your daily life to
Right.
squat like that.
Right.
And eat dinner or go to the bathroom or whatever it was, or just relax or do chores or do tasks or whatever, and not anymore. So
Right.
that's something that comes to mind as well.
Yeah, no, exactly right. 100%. So squatting symbolism kind of went through sitting in the throne and all that kind of stuff. So yes, so squatting is more, it was how people sat before, if you didn't have anything to sit on, obviously you would squat. If
Right.
if the floor is dirty, you would squat. If you're working, on the floor and there was no table or something, then you would be squatting,
Right.
essentially, right?
Right.
And so this was also the way that people, and they still do in many parts of the world, go to the bathroom. And so you squat down. And if you travel around the world, there's a lot of places where they don't have Western style toilets. So you don't have a toilet that you sit down. You don't have a porcelain throne, you literally have a hole in the ground,
Right.
basically. And these holes will oftentimes have a place to put your feet, right next to it. And so you're literally squatting down. And so this is how a lot of people do it, right? And so when you're squatting like that, it actually is more of a clearing sort of thing, when you're going to the bathroom.
Right.
And so things get out easier. Your digestive tract is lined up for that,
Right.
versus when you are sitting down on a toilet. Yeah, it gets the job done, obviously.
Right.
But in a way, it can kind of be argued that it's actually, is it more effective? Is it less effective? I guess that's up for debate or
Right.
whatever. But there are people who say that, no, this is like the natural way to go to the bathroom. And there's also cultures, too, who say that this is the natural way to give birth as
Yeah.
well.
Mhm.
And so what I read when I was looking into this was that the birth canal opens up 20 to 30% larger when a woman is squatting to give birth
Wow.
than when she's lying down in a hospital bed.
Wow.
And so that's very interesting to me too.
Yeah.
And so from childbirth, feminine, right, to go into the bathroom, right? Squatting has its place. It has its purpose. The other thing I'll say, and I'm thinking of the Rider-Waite card as well with the devil card, the devil squatting on the monolith, his legs are creating a V. And so your eye even is drawn downwards, right? And so the V brings your eye downward. And so even in the Capricorn glyph, you will see like a little V,
Right.
on the left-hand side
Mhm.
of the sigil there. And so so I think that's all very interesting and very fascinating. Also, the fact that once again, when you're dealing with these words and you're breaking it down etymologically, and you're looking for kind of the root or the origin of these words and like what they might relate to, Sat, as in Saturn, relates to sit, relates to set as well. And so Set is the like chaos god of ancient Egypt. And so I read a lot about Set because I wanted to learn more about the North. Because wouldn't you know, Set corresponds with the northern sky, as does his mother. And so I interviewed actually a guy who is a practicing Setian. And we got into all this stuff. And so it's on my YouTube channel if people want to listen to it. And so Set was a chaos god, and he's associated with, and this is more esoteric stuff. So if you go to mainstream sources, they're going to say some of this stuff, but they're not going to get down to some of this polar symbolism, basically.
Right.
He was associated with pillars. And so he was associated with posts. And they also say that he was behind Ursa Major, that Ursa Major was considered to be his mother, and that he was hiding behind her. And so they say literally the location of Set is behind Ursa Major, according to some occultists. I mentioned this last time too, but according to some occultists like Kenneth Grant, that the tradition was that Ursa Major corresponded with Set and also corresponded with Saturn. and that Saturn was the planetary correspondence for Set, and also the planetary correspondence for Ursa Major as well. And so that to me is interesting, given again the relationship between Set and Sat, and a lot of Setian symbolism, I would say, definitely relates to Saturn as well. Because he is this god, again, this god of chaos. But my understanding is actually that he's not a chaotic evil god. That actually, what my understanding is that the thought process is, which relates to the devil. The thought process is that if you're trying to fight evil, you want to be respecting and you want to be working with a deity that's also evil, but more evil than the god that may bring, unfavorable things to you.
Okay.
And so the idea, fight fire with fire,
Right.
essentially.
Okay.
So if you're trying to fight evil in your life, the thought process behind some of these Setians was that, well, I'm going to make my primary god the most chaotic god of all, so that any evil doer or deity or whatever that might try and harm me and my family, I'm already worshiping the most evil, chaotic deity that there is.
Right.
So he'll be able to fight off any sort of evil presence.
Makes sense. That's more, to me, seems more of like a chaotic way of looking at things too.
Yeah, so he's chaotic good,
Right.
not chaotic evil. So people believed in this chaotic good presence or deity in order to fight chaotic evil deities, which I think is really interesting. And that's one of the things that when I interviewed that fellow about Set, that I took away, and I'm like, oh, that's actually pretty fascinating. I can see the logic behind that. So the reason why I say that this is related to the devil is when you look into devil symbolism, I've read this a few times in different books. The one thing that's said is that there are some groups that actually will pay more homage to the devil than they will to Christ or to God. And so the example that I read was that they will sacrifice one animal to God or Christ, but then they'll sacrifice 30 animals to the devil.
Okay.
And so then people are like, wait a second. So do you worship the devil? Do you people worship the devil? And their logic was, well, the devil is closer. The devil is here. The devil is kind of like amongst us. The devil has more of an influence on the people of Earth than God does. Even God is more, he's a higher tiered sort of deity. So if there's anyone you want to appease, if there's anyone that you want on your side, it's actually the devil. And so that was their logic. And so, which I think is kind of interesting too.
Right.
So once again, you sacrifice one sheep or goat or whatever to God, but then you sacrifice 30 to the devil, right? So this gets into the card that we've been talking about lately.
That's what I was thinking in my head. Yeah.
Right. So there's an older tarot card where the devil literally has his hand hovering over a home.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's kind of this sort of enigmatic kind of, there's something to it.
It's one of my favorite tarot cards of all time, I'll say.
Really?
Yeah. Because I think to me, it's because he's standing at a distance from the home as well. He's he's not like right immediately over it, or he's not bigger than the home. The perspective is that he's far away from the home. Kind of like when people take a photo so they look like they're holding the moon or whatever. That tarot card is kind of doing the same thing.
Yeah.
He's at a far distance, so the home is kind of small, and he's just hovering over his hand over the home as though he is kind of like the controller of the home space.
Right.
Which to me lends more credit to Saturn potentially probably being feminine originally, because although a man has a very important role in the home, the woman, it's, as we've talking about in a traditional role, it's kind of like her domain. She is the domestic goddess that rules the home, that runs the home, that makes sure that the home is tidy and fit and fit for a king and fit for her children and herself,
right,
to be there. And so it makes a lot of sense to me also from the perspective that Saturn is all about containment and the ability to create and hold boundaries
Yes.
strong
Yeah.
and to understand when boundaries are important, which we talked about a lot in the last episode. But to me, I mean, a house, whether it's a square house, a round house, a dome house, it is a boundary. It is
Right.
there to contain whatever's within it.
Right.
And so the devil having that position of with his hand over it, it to me, and he's casual. His legs are crossed, almost as if he's like leaning on something.
Right.
He's casually just like, yeah, this is my domain right here. This is I'm hovering this. It's my
Right.
domain and I rule it. And to me, if there's a sign that rules the home, it would be Saturn, in my opinion.
Right.
And I'm sure there's a case that can be argued for other signs, and I'd be open to that. But to me, it has a very Saturnian rulership vibe, right off the bat.
Right. Right. Yeah. No, I think so too. I think that the symbolism is kind of helpful when you bring up the newer devil cards.
Yeah.
Because what you'll see is that the devil is squatting on a monolith, a black monolith, and then you have man and woman chained to the monolith.
Right.
Right?
Right.
Man and woman. When we're talking about the home, we're talking about domestic affairs. What are we talking about? We're talking about the unification of man and woman,
Right.
basically.
Right.
That creates, children and has a family and all this other kind of stuff. So absolutely, there's a binding component to Saturn. There's a binding component to the devil, and that is what union and being committed in union. That's partly what it is. This binding thing.
Right.
So that's the thing I think that we're kind of talking about too, is that a lot of Saturnian symbolism, binding. When I say being bound or binding, I think a lot of people, I could be wrong, maybe not this audience, but I think a lot of normal people, I'm assuming normal people don't watch this, but I think
what is normal?
yeah. And so I think that a lot of people would think that, oh, binding is bad. Binding's not good.
Right.
And it's like, well, no, it's necessary.
Yeah.
It's things come together here and binding, bound, and then things split apart. This is what Baphomet has on his arms. He has Solve Coagula. So one arm says Solve, the other one says Coagula, dissolve and coagulate. Things coming together, coagulate, and then things dissolving, breaking apart.
Right.
Solve. So the binding aspect to me is, but also too, that's why I think that what we're really dealing with Saturn is that masculine and feminine binding and release. I think that these two things are there. Scythe, the sickle.
Okay.
Cutting things apart, severing things, severing ties. So I think that this binding aspect, this constrictive thing that people generally think about with Saturn, the partition aspect of things, all of that, that's just one side of Saturn's coin, I think, potentially.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And
I think so.
And that this binding, as an example, within marriage or union in a relationship, it's also what is going to, I'm not saying for everybody, but I'm saying that there is a freedom there.
Oh, yeah.
You have a partner that you can rely on and trust and do things with, and someone who's going to look out for you and you'll look out for them and all this other stuff. So there is a, to me, I'm just starting to really see that Saturn plays a role with both sides. Once again, just like Baphomet, which is why a lot of modern devil cards essentially look just like Baphomet. Pretty much. And what is Baphomet? Baphomet is part devil, part angel, part man, part woman. I've always said that there's a lot of mercurial symbolism with Baphomet, so I'm starting to kind of see that with Saturn now. Even as we just go through this conversation, I'm starting to be like, man, maybe Saturn is more of like a mercurial type planet where it's all of these things. But I think it's all of these things potentially to more of an extreme, to more on more of a sort of refined, aged sort of state. So I think that kind of makes sense to me right now as I'm thinking about it.
Definitely.
So I can just kind of see all of it now. But so this binding thing, one way of saying it would be that every proposition contains its opposite. So if I say black,
White.
Yes. When I say positive,
Negative.
right. Man,
Woman.
right. Exactly. So I think that that's kind of the thing that we're dealing with here potentially is that as above, so below.
Right.
You know, the highest of highs contain the lowest of lows and vice versa.
Right.
So this low nature, if you don't conquer that, that's one of the practical things I think with the devil card. If you don't work with your lower nature, to me, it's not abandoning it. It's not sweeping it under the rug. It's integrating it. It's integrating it and understanding it for what it is. That if you don't get a firm sort of grasp or handle over your lower nature, how do you expect for your higher nature to be expressed?
Right. Yeah.
And so that's what I think the power of the devil is. So some people might be turned off by us talking about the devil and Baphomet and binding and shitting and squatting and whatever. You know what I mean? But it's like we're humans, so we have a lower nature and we have a higher nature. So I think that in the polar age, to be honest with you, I think that people had a better understanding of this.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I think that today in kind of the solarized world, it's kind of like the new agey thing. It's like love and light and this and that, and we can't look at anything bad or, oh no, that's negative and
right.
Whatever. So let's not address these things. And so what a big sort of shift as well as we've been talking about is this sort of as I said earlier, the supreme center being gone during the Dark Ages.
Mm-hmm.
Woman. And the true sort of like spectrum that is like primordial feminine symbolism, dark mother symbolism, I think that went away as well. So now that's like out of sight, out of mind for most people.
Yeah.
It's not really acknowledged, which means that we're not living in a holistic sort of worldview if we're not acknowledging that. So I think that the correspondence, right? I think Cheney, shout out Cheney, mentioned it last time, but like the crone. Right, Crone and Chronos.
Right, exactly.
That's actually kind of what we're dealing with here. And
yeah.
so I think that Saturn, one of its aspects is that it is the primordial mother. That's what I think is going on here.
Yeah, I would agree with you for sure. And there's actually more people I think that fall into the category of having these thoughts that Saturn is more feminine. I mean, just from doing a small amount of research on my own, there's a handful of things that pop up when you even do a Google search, even though I know Google is like, whatever, it's not going to give you everything. But if you dig far enough, there are a handful of people that I've come across that definitely, this is pretty normal to associate Saturn as
right.
a feminine energy, or originally was feminine.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. Like I said, a lot of comments that I received were basically people saying as much.
Yeah.
And backing it up and being like, yeah, that's totally how I tend to see it and everything else. So it kind of just depends on, where you're currently at, what pockets of the internet or what community you might be affiliated with, what you're reading.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff.
Right.
For
well,
sure.
And one of the things that I think about with the feminine connection to Saturn when it comes to plants is elder. And so the elder tree or the elder shrub is typically known as a crone tree. That's one of the nicknames for it. And, I've been fond of elder for many, many years, have worked with elder very much. One of the, I would say one of my go-to herbs to work with, but in terms of like spiritual stuff, wanting to connect with the elder on a deeper level and feeling the feminine energy from an elder tree since I began being in the presence of elders.
Right.
And understanding the way that they grow and what their attributes are, what the medicine is, and also what they symbolize on that level of being about boundaries, working with the liminal space, being the thing that kind of is the boundary between here and the liminal spaces or here and the other worlds, utilizing communication through the wood and things like that. And so to me, when I first really honed in on that one, I then started wondering about the Saturn connection and, well, okay, is it always father time or is it mother time?
Right.
Was it mother time as first off and then became father time?
Right.
And I think that there's a lot of stuff in these sorts of myths, particularly in the natural world or herbal world, that kind of point to this as well.
Right.
And I know we kind of brought up the wise woman tradition and all that stuff in the last episode, but again, goes back to it corresponding to the solar and polar tradition.
Right. 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 No, definitely. No, there's a lot to be said about that for
Yeah.
sure. So, I mean, obviously, yeah, time. You're always going to see Saturnian, not always, but you're going to see a lot of Saturnian figures like Kronos, Father Time. They always have the hourglass, and they're going to be related to this slow passage of time. Saturn makes so much sense to be related to time, because of presumably its old age. We almost called this show Saturn the Elder.
Right. Right.
So I think Saturn was the first one to go through these different cycles, of life. And so it's been around old enough to have shifted and everything else.
Mm-hmm.
I'm thinking of the fact that, the hourglass, the way it works, right? You tip it over and then all of the sand goes through to the lower portion of the hourglass, right?
Right.
And then once all the sand makes it all the way through, then however much sand is in there, that's how much time has passed, right?
Yeah.
30 minutes or whatever, an hour. And so I'm thinking of that, and I'm thinking of the kind of that pinch, right in the middle, and there's the center, so it's like all of the sand has to go through this like narrow sort of center, right? Almost kind of reminds me a little bit of like a Taurus field or something. Or I'm thinking of another. It's more of a modern image, but it's like a Father Time figure, and he literally he has his hand on like the hour hand of a clock.
Okay. Yeah.
And he like is either stopping it or he's helping it move or something like that, right? And I'm thinking about just how a clock works, and it's like the hands move around the center point of the clock. That there has to be that center point, for a clock to function like that. Right. There has to be the point of axis. There has to be, the point of pivot, right, for the hands to move around. And so one of the things is that this shift has been from literally that center to everything outside of the center, to the exterior, I guess you can say, so it's funny to me. That's kind of how I see a lot of things having moved towards in the solar age, is that we're not thinking about the inner. So we're not thinking about our inner selves, right? A lot of times, I'm sure people here are, but it's more external.
Yeah.
So it's like what's happening outside of you, what's happening on the world stage, what's happening with your favorite celebrities, what's happening, on social media. Guilty once again over here of all of that. But I think that during the primordial age, that center point had way more meaning and value behind it. And every single thing symbolically has a center point. It can't exist without it,
Right.
essentially. So it just depends on what you're talking about, right? But even you just look at any kind of image, right? You look at a circle. It's like, well, the circle is able to exist because there is that middle point, that the outer line, revolves around, essentially. So that central point is and was of primary concern. And it seems as though Saturn has a relationship with it, because it related to this early age, the polar age.
Right.
And so, and what we talked about last time too, it may have been in direct alignment with the world axis.
Yeah. Yeah. It definitely probably was.
So, and I brought up the whole tree ring thing.
Right.
That maybe Saturn was, the first planet along the world axis, and then it shifted out, over time, just like new tree rings.
Right.
Right. And so then when you have a nice big healthy tree, the outer part of the tree is the oldest part of the tree, and the newest rings are in the center of the tree.
Right.
Right. And so one of the things that I really wanted to touch upon, it relates to this idea, right? But I think what's happened too is as we've moved away from this central pole, from the world axis, from this supreme center, which connects all centers, in my opinion, um, that when you move away from this pole on a perspective level, spiritually, metaphysically, it basically is no different than like a radio moving away from an antenna.
Mm.
And so you're going to lose signal. And so as humanity has moved away from this supreme center, as it's been lost, the signal gets distorted and the signal gets fuzzy, and things aren't clear, right? There's a lack of clarity. And so I think that maybe perhaps this is what's happened to Saturn as well, is that when it was closer to the world axis and as it's shifted out and perhaps as new planets have come to be, that literally its original essence or image also, not unlike a radio moving away from a tower, that the signal is getting weaker, in a
Yeah.
way. The signal isn't as clear as it used to be. So now there's all of these new ideas about what Saturn represents and what it's always meant, and it's evil and you don't want to, whatever. And so align yourself with it, or things like that. I think that is kind of partly what's going on here. Kind of getting back to the idea that the supreme center, that during the dark ages, that's what's lost. So now what's lost is Saturn's relationship to this center, right? Because it's so far out, you would never think that it has any kind of relationship to it.
Right.
But that's where it came from, just like everything else.
Wow. Interesting. Yeah, I like that. I just had a thought and it just escaped me. Man, but it was something having to do with, a lot of times when you look at the astrological characteristics of Capricorn, which obviously is ruled by Saturn, one of the things is kind of, I always think about, there's like a very kind of straightforward, astute sort of energy with Capricorn. A lot of times Capricorns, myself included, can be classified as cold or can be classified as stoic or something like that. But I think one of the characteristics in a well-evolved person that's under the rulership of Capricorn is keeping yourself and helping others get out of the victim mindset. And I think that is something that within the sacred center polar tradition probably was a pretty big deal.
Yeah, that's totally.
And the further away from this sacred center, the more victimhood, the more excuses there are.
Exactly.
And people don't even, most of the time, and we do it ourselves, and I'm sure I know I've done it and probably still do it, but like you don't even realize you're making excuses sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
When you're just explaining yourself to somebody, and the amount of times that you can kind of see it in conversation with people is like, oh, wow, okay. Just sounds like a lot of excuses to me, but you can keep saying that it's not, or telling yourself that it's not. And I think that the further away from the sacred center, from the, this kind of mentality we get, the more victimhood and victim mentality we get, which creates, in my opinion, weaker people in general.
Well, this reminds me of kind of the runic sort of philosophy.
Yeah.
Which is what you've mentioned before, and feel free and correct me or chime in or whatever, but that it was more of a philosophy of if let's just say you're working with the runes and you're working with the Norse deities, that the philosophy is more so give me the strength to do what I need to do, not asking for a handout from the gods.
Exactly. Not going to the gods and saying, gods, whomever you are, gods or goddesses, give me this. Whatever it is. I want this, therefore I shall have it, just because. It would be going to them and asking, as just like you said, asking for the strength within and the ability in yourself to get that thing you want without just expecting it to come or poof out of thin air. It's just going to appear, which the case can be made that sometimes that happens. You're on a hike and all of a sudden you look over, oh my God, that's the perfect rock. Wow, poof, out of thin air. Whatever. You could say that. But in general, it is all more about your own responsibility within the wants or needs that you have.
Because and I love this angle with all of it, because I think that you're right. I think that you're right. With the polar age, um, it was more empowering. It was more about your divinity, and it was more about your perspective. And that's one of the things that the world axis actually represents is your personal perspective,
Mm-hmm.
and that you are a unit that has a unique opinion, has a unique story, and that you're here for a good reason. The way the modern world wants you to believe, the modern world wants you to believe that everything is chaotic, everything is random, you're just one amongst millions, no one cares about you. The world and the universe, or the world and the solar system, is just one of many out there, one of countless. Carl Sagan, right? He had a book called Pale Blue Dot, and the idea was that, if you look at Earth from a satellite photo, look at that tiny little pale blue dot. So all of human history, everything you've ever known, just exists on this little dot in infinite space. This little grain of sand, on this vast ocean, or this vast beach, right? And so everything in the modern world, to me, seems like it's meant to dehumanize. It's meant to be non-personal,
Mm-hmm.
non-spiritual. It is anti-human. There's a lack of warmth. It's more mechanical. This fits in line with the three traditions of healing that we've talked about. Is
Yeah.
the modern scientific tradition versus the older wise woman tradition, and all of the things that kind of come with it, right? And so there's like some of the authors that I'm reading right now, I mean, they're very open about there being like a crisis in the modern world, and that there is something, a distinct lack of like a spiritual backbone here, right? When you get to your center, that's what you're rediscovering,
Mm.
about yourself. And so you realize that your actions, your thoughts, it matters. It truly does matter, and so I think that this was more important during this hyperborean polar northern age. In the solar age, not so much. I think you're more like, it's like you're cannon fodder or something,
Yeah, yeah.
or you're more dispensable. uh yeah. And so you're basically could be, the system chews you up and spits you out, and
Or disposable, you probably meant.
disposable. Sorry,
Yeah, that's okay.
I knew that sounded
I
off.
knew what you meant. Yeah.
Yeah, 100% disposable. And so I just think that that has been part of the major shift too, as well, with all of this stuff. Is from like they don't want you to know that by going within and by tapping into your center, that's how you really connect to the infinite. That is how you connect to the cosmos. That is how you connect to God. Right now we live in a world where everyone's trying to do that outside of themselves.
Right.
And this kind of gets into some of the stuff we've been talking about lately with astrology, and how people view astrology and how people use astrology and all these other types of things. It's really interesting to me that, and obviously people who watch my channel know I have a fondness for astrology. It's given me a lot, and I'm going to continue researching the signs, and I'm going to continue doing my work that way because I get a lot of value out of it. But I just think it's very interesting that in order for people to learn about self, some people, from like an astrological perspective, they think that they can get closer to self by looking at a chart and learning about these symbols and sigils, and learning about these angles, and learning about these degrees, and learning all of these functions that are required to understand kind of your natal chart. And then, as we know, a natal chart, there's so many schools of thought about what is the most important thing to be looking at. What's of primary concern with your chart? Oh, wait, you're not addressing this meteor, or you're not looking at this thing, or you're not looking at that thing. oh, you don't know about, acknowledging this, that, or whatever. It's a lifetime study. You can continue going down this rabbit hole and continue learning about different layers of a natal chart, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's really funny to me that one, there are people who are astrologers who are giving readings and stuff. I'm not saying everybody's like this,
Right.
but they're giving readings to people to help facilitate an understanding of self for somebody who might want a reading. And they don't even look at the constellations.
Right.
They don't even look at the stars.
Right.
They're not acknowledging what's happening up there. They haven't looked and stargazed, let alone really track things, in like a serious sort of way, maybe perhaps ever. But yet they're giving people advice on their chart, their birth chart.
Right.
And they might be accurate with certain things, maybe not. You go to different astrologers and you're going to, you go to 10 different astrologers, you're going to hear 10 different opinions about things.
Right.
You're going to hear variations on the theme, right?
Right.
And so to me, it's very interesting to me that somebody would want to know more about self, get closer to their center. And so where are they going to go to find that? In this chart, or they're going to look up here and up there and all of that. There's nothing wrong with observing. There's nothing wrong with taking it in. There's nothing wrong. I think there's actually a correspondence. Symbolically, an external search, to me, there's a correspondence with that representing an internal search.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
So an external journey is symbolic of an internal journey.
Right.
Right. This is the path of the fool. This is the hero's journey. There are so many things that are like this, but the external search is emblematic of the internal search, right? Well, there's a shortcut to all of this, and it's within self,
Yeah.
and it's with you, and it's contemplation, and it's understanding your thoughts, and it's feeling, acknowledging your emotions and allowing them to kind of pass through, and everything else. I just feel like sometimes the natal chart, people get kind of lost in the weeds, and they're more concerned about what's happening 2, 3, 4, 5 months from now than being in the present moment.
Right.
And there's a quote that I've said many times over, but it's very helpful. It was some monk that said something along the lines of, if you are constantly thinking about the past, you're going to be prone to depression. If you're constantly thinking about the future, you're going to be prone to anxiety. If you're thinking about the present moment, you're going to be prone to peace. And so I think a lot of times divination takes us out of the present moment. And either you're forecasting ahead,
right,
or you're looking back and reflecting. There's nothing wrong with looking ahead, and there's nothing wrong with reflection either, And so I think that it's smart to, if you see the writing on the wall,
right,
acknowledge it.
Or patterns.
If you see patterns,
patterns
exactly.
are very important to
patterns
witness.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But I just feel like in the modern world, a lot of people, I'm not saying everybody, once again, just to clarify that for like the third or fourth time.
Yeah.
Especially people listening, but I think that basically, I think that divination and the way it's kind of used right now, man, I see a lot of people and they're looking way too far ahead, or they're looking way too far back, but they're not in the present moment.
Right.
And I think that is another aspect to the polar tradition that I believe seems to make sense, because the world axis and the pole star in the heavens, the pole star represents an eternal star. It's an imperishable star. It represents a still point. So to me, on one level, this kind of ties together ideas related to tradition, ideas that might be futuristic, but also this idea of the current moment right now, of the eternal now, essentially, of the eternal present moment. And so, yeah, so that's some of kind of what we've been talking about a little bit, with astrology and things like that, and how some people use it and everything else. So I give tarot readings, and one of the things I've said multiple times for people is that I do not prefer to look ahead.
Right.
That I'm not going to give you a yes, you're going to get with so and so. No, you're not going to get that job. because I think a lot of people think that that's what divination is here for,
Right.
just to give me tell me what's going to happen, and I understand why people kind of gravitate towards that. In my personal opinion, even though I said that there's nothing wrong with looking ahead and looking and reflecting, I think personally something like tarot or even a natal chart, I do think it's actually probably best used to reflect.
Yeah.
Either check in right now in the current moment or reflect, but not necessarily look ahead.
I would agree with that, and I feel like my view on this has really come into form, over the last handful of years. When it comes to this, and I've never really been one to want to always constantly have readings done or do readings because of these things, because I think also it can cloud your vision of the current moment,
Right.
because then you're projecting into the present so hard that you're going to be in a state of anxiety, which when you're in a state of anxiety, it's really hard to be present, and then it's really hard to be grounded, and it's really hard to be centered.
Are you saying when you're projecting ahead so far?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know if I said.
You said present.
Oh,
Doesn't
okay.
matter.
Yeah. When you're projecting in the future,
Right.
and I think one of the things that came to mind when we were talking about all this stuff in the center, and in my opinion, just this is personal experience or whatever, personal opinion. When you find your center, when you find that thing or those things that you are like, no, this is it. This is like part of my essence, part of my core. You actually don't feel as though you need the external validation
Right, exactly.
anymore,
Right.
or as much anymore. Yes, of course. There's always going to be times, even if you've found your purpose or your thing, where you're going to be like, well, wait a second, is this right? Or is that, no one is ever 100%, in my opinion, sure or whatever of anything really. But it's when you know that about yourself, you actually don't need to lean on these sorts of things that are external crutches or what have you to tell you what's going to happen, because you have more faith and confidence and trust in your own self and your own abilities, that, well, whatever it is going to be, it's going to be okay, or it's going to be all right, or whatever, without having to even, assess it through another means or an outside means. And, that's
Right.
just something that came to mind, because I think that's just been my own personal
no.
experience.
Right. No, exactly. So people have heard before, this is more of a common thing, that you are your own worst enemy, right?
Mm-hmm.
You also are your own best ally.
Yeah.
You can be your own best ally, and so it's speaking to kind of what you're talking about, so I think that to me, what I get out of a lot of this symbolism is going back to your sort of most authentic self, getting towards your still point within, which connects you, to the cosmos. And I feel as though ever since I've gone down this path with polar symbolism and everything, I feel that more strongly than I ever did before, when I was, as an example, just looking into mythology and just looking into astrology. Even now that I think about it with astrology, I'm like, okay, 12 signs, but like, what's the unifying thing here? What's the unifying sort of aspect that ties it all together? Is it the sun, because everything is based around the path of the sun? Is it the first sign of astrology because it's the first? Is it the last sign of astrology because it's the last? Is it this sign? Is it that sign? What is it? And what I realized is that, oh, well, first off, there's, with astrology, there's so many systems out there that there's no agreeing. You're not going to get suddenly everybody to agree on what the proper way of looking at the signs is,
Right.
or even an understanding of what time it is, what sign we're actually in,
Right. All of it. What year we're in.
Right.
Yeah.
What I realized is, though, the most important part to me personally is that all of the signs of astrology revolve around one star, and it's the pole star. That's the unifying aspect. And that's why I think that, too, in a lot of ways, people have written about solar cults suppressing polar information, solar factions suppressing, smearing polar symbolism.
Right.
That's a whole conversation That's multiple videos that we can kind of talk about.
Right.
You know, that there are it seems as though two of the larger factions esoterically are a solar faction against a polar faction, and that this has been a thing for a very, very, very long time. And when you understand it and you can see it, it's kind of mind-blowing. It's really crazy to think about, actually. You know, and so World War II being one example of polar symbolism, like the swastika,
Right.
you know, being viewed one way,
Mm-hmm.
being promoted to be associated with certain ideas and concepts and things like that, when it's actually one of the most holistic, beautiful symbols that has ever existed. It encodes so much amazing information that's why there was a campaign against it, and why it was connected to certain groups and everything else. So it's a whole can of worms, basically. But that's what I see. So solar factions, seemingly unbeknownst to some of them,
Right.
you know, against this sort of polar kind of understanding of things, you know. So yeah, and just because we're talking about all this stuff too, again, they say that we live in a solar system, but I believe that it's actually more accurate to say that we live in a polar system. You know, that's been the great shift as well. Not saying that people understood it as a polar system back in the day, but basically all of the symbolism, everything that I've learned, it's like that was their understanding, though. You know, and that central pole connected all of the realms essentially together.
Right.
So it's a truly unifying thing. You know, it's more of a holistic way of looking at everything. It's a more holistic way of decoding, in my opinion, which is why I'm so hungry for this information, because I looked in, you know, I have a lot of symbolism books around, you know, and I've looked into a lot of books, looked into a lot of symbols, and the one symbol there, or the one sort of philosophy or angle that connects all of the things together is the polar tradition. It's the northern tradition. You know, it makes way more sense than anything else. Modern symbolism, you're going to see a lot of people associating everything essentially to the sun, and that is more of a modern construct. You know, so on one level, I understand why people repeat that, you know, but it's not entirely accurate.
Yeah.
You know, there's a larger sort of greater scope, I would say.
No, I mean, it makes sense. And just to kind of tie it all back to Saturn again.
Yeah.
And one of the things I'm thinking about is if you're going off of the calendar year, you know, January is the first month of the year, and then it is ruled by Saturn. So again, we're back at the one, we're back at the pole, we're back at the first
Right.
thing. It is
Yeah.
the first month, and it is ruled by Capricorn. And the other thing that I think of with the Saturnian stuff and all that we're talking about is that it's like it's all about lessons, is usually what Saturn is about. There's a lot of lessons that come through. And some of the stuff we're talking about, these are some of the hardest lessons to learn. They're some of the most challenging lessons to learn. When you start to look at the world and ask more questions and wonder what's going on, there's huge paradigm shifts that happen that are painful sometimes, that make you lose, that make people turn away from you, that make people look at you differently or what have you. But it's these moments that are so important that Saturn rules and that are essential to, in my opinion, living a healthy, holistic, honest life with integrity.
Mm-hmm.
And that's why to me Saturn really seems as though it has such an important place with this polar tradition, with the idea of it being the first planet, whatever you want to call it, celestial body, but the primordial mother energy, because some of the things that are tied into Saturn are basically their rules for life. And I think that when it's kind of thrown under the bus as this darker, sort of spooky, scary, heavy, immovable thing, then it kind of you lose the value in some of the more positive aspects of it when you really look at it. Even though it looks harsh on the outside, or that may have been a really hard lesson to learn, it's
Mhm.
actually really valuable that you learned it, and it's really valuable that you learned it when you learned it, and hopefully you're able to apply it and then integrate it so that you don't do the same thing again.
Mhm.
And that, I think, is what
Well,
is most important in life.
yeah, because the sort of polar wisdom is really seeing kind of what you're made of.
Yeah.
Polar wisdom has more to do about you than anything else, and that is difficult. That's not easy to truly look in the mirror and acknowledge the role you've played in your life versus scapegoating, which we talked about last time, I think.
Yeah.
Scapegoating someone else, scapegoating the system, scapegoating whatever, and saying that they are the reason why I feel unaccomplished, or
Yeah.
I'm unhappy, or
Right.
things didn't work out my way. That is the victim mindset.
Mm-hmm.
And so I like the word integrity that you used. It's like having integrity, not relying on your politicians to have integrity,
Yeah.
not relying on
Good luck.
not relying on any authority figure to have integrity, but for you to have integrity.
Right.
Not relying on anyone else to have a moral compass or to whatever, do what's right, but for you to do what's right, and
Right.
for you to have a moral compass. It's about your true north, right? And so I think it's interesting that integrity
Right.
right? Integrity.
Totally.
Right? And so a lot of people don't like kind of this sort of outlook or whatever, because it kind of shines a light on the role they've played, and their decisions, and their sort of how they think about things, and all that kind of stuff, their philosophy and all of that. And so I totally get it. I totally understand. But integrity too, also starting with I.
Yeah.
So I, as in
Mhm.
self, right?
Yeah.
The Hebrew letter that corresponds with the devil card, by the way, is ayin, which
Mm.
means I. And so, like on the Crowley card, you're going to see a goat, a Himalayan mountain goat with a third eye, right? And so I is another symbol of the world axis. And
Haha.
even in the Bach saga, which, take it for what it's worth, but there's a few things in the Bach saga I find to be very interesting. But they say that literally the lowercase I is the world axis, and the dot on top is the pole star, and that the uppercase I is the world axis, and Isa is also the world axis.
Right.
And so isn't it interesting that I, it relates to self, it relates to vision, your third eye, potentially your first eye, the world axis, all of these different things, because that's really what it comes back to, because we are part of a greater network. So it's no different. Like, we are on we are creeks that belong to a bigger system, that belongs to a bigger system, that belongs to a raging river.
Right.
You know what I mean? So we're all part of this huge sort of system. So we are truly, like, we are aspects of the one, the one, even the number one. That's a world axis symbol,
Yeah.
because it's the most holistic sort of symbol that you can have. Either the one or the dot, it's kind of the same thing, in my opinion, because when you look at a one from the top down perspective, it's just going to be a little dot, but it's a pole, because it represents the cosmic pole. It represents the world axis, pole star, north pole, all these different things. There's a reason why the number one, we use a vertical line to indicate it, and it goes back to that early tradition.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I love it.
Nice.
Wow. Another banger.
Yeah, you think so?
I think so. I mean, do you feel like you got through your notes, or?
I think so. I mean, let me look to see if there's any stragglers here.
Yeah.
I always feel like it kind of comes down to energy for me a lot of the time.
Oh yeah. I mean,
so,
we're at a quarter to. I mean, we've been going for almost 2 hours, so
nice.
it's I get it.
I will say maybe one thing that I did want to talk about a little bit. I think some people have kind of an understanding of it, perhaps, but just a little bit about Pan.
Okay. Oh yeah.
And so Pan representing all. That like so that's what Pan means. So panspermia as an example. And so Pan means all, it also means bread, ban.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's interesting that Pan connects to grain symbolism as well. One of my favorite Pan paintings ever is Pan playing his flute, his panpipe, in a field of golden wheat,
Yeah.
basically. And it's so epic and awesome. And so the story of Pan, because it relates to Capricorn. So Capricorn, and the devil and Saturn, you know, really is all of these things correspond to Pan. That Pan is kind of a symbol that fits right in with all of this stuff, right? And so when we're talking about Saturn, we're talking about a primordial god. And what I'm understanding is that, and this has really become clear to me over the last couple years, is that I used to think that all of the gods, for whatever reason, when I was younger, that they were similar in age, about similar, come from similar like periods of time or something like that.
Right.
So not the case. In fact, that is like a big aspect to understanding mythology, is that there's different tiers of deity. There's different tiers of gods.
Right.
So there are newer gods and there's old gods. So as an example, I would say that the planets, as old as they are, might be a newer tier of deity, as an example, that there are more primordial gods. So it almost like, it really like, it just depends on what scope you're talking about, right? So someone might say that a deity, like a Roman god or whatever, oh man, that's a really old god. That's like a perspective, I suppose.
Mm-hmm.
There's far older deities, far older gods, right? Lovecraft, Lovecraft talks about like the oldest of deities, these really truly ancient ones, right? On a planetary level, on a zodiacal level, Saturn is like the oldest god, seemingly. I can't think of, what else would it be?
Right.
Right.
Seems to be.
And so Saturn would be the oldest god. And so she, they are associated with primordial energy, primordial symbolism.
What are Saturn's pronouns?
Yeah, I know. That'll be the next show.
Oh man.
And so Saturn is a primordial ancient god, as we've been talking about, and Pan is kind of a substitute for this idea, actually. And so when Pan died, the natural world, they say that like the animals of the forest all cried. And so because what this symbolizes, in my opinion, is the end of the pagan era.
Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about this.
Right, making way for Christianity.
Right.
That's one way of interpreting the symbolism, is that when Pan died, so did all of the older nature gods and primordial deities and paganism at large.
What a sad day that would have been.
Exactly. The thing is that they shouted from, there's variations on the myth, but they shouted from ships onto shore, the great Pan is dead.
Wow.
And then literally you could hear the cries of the forest, according to the mythology.
Right. And so it's also metaphor as well.
Exactly. It's
obviously.
A metaphor.
Right.
But it's like, to me, symbolically, it makes me wonder, is this kind of a substitute metaphor for the end of the Saturnian age?
I love this. Yeah, and the end of the polar age.
And the end of the polar age.
Right. Whoa. Yes.
Right. And so that's what it's speaking to, I think, is that it's the end of the golden age. It's the end of this Hyperborean northern age. It's the end of the earth being held up on a pedestal and being revered, making way for more of a heliocentric solar kind of age, a new age, if you will.
Right.
So just wanted to throw that out there, because I feel like I wrote down Pan last time. I didn't get around to explaining that, but I think that there's something there maybe worth chewing on.
I think there is too. That's a really great point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like the direction that's headed for sure.
Nice. Thank you. So that's what I got.
Wow, very nice. As always, thank you.
Yeah, you got it.
Thanks for doing another episode, and I mean, people really love hearing from you too. So
nice.
Yeah,
I like it.
there'll be more
We'll
to
do it
come.
again.
Oh, yes, definitely. Maybe not Saturn, but,
Something else.
we'll have more coming down the pipeline for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, cool. I mean, I say we can put a bow on this one.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Let's do
and again, let people know where they can find you. And
well, we got I
I
we
know.
got some slides too.
That's true. We'll just do
Yeah.
the slides. Let's bring up the slides. All right. Thank you again, everybody in the chat, for hanging out and being here with us, listening in. And as always, thank you to all of the patrons that support us over here on the Healing Home. You guys are great and awesome. So, as always, thank you, Chance, Sarah G, Liam, Miri and Hank, Jenny G, Erica, Moonlander, Spoons, Mary, Louie, Logan, Mickey, Doreen, Debbie, Natasha, Nausicaa, Stephanie, Jennifer, Charlai, Peter, Elise and James, Amy, Rachel, Trisha, and Vanessa. Thank you. The list is getting longer and it's really exciting.
Definitely.
So thanks, guys. As always, we appreciate you. The patreon.com/the healing home if you'd like to jump over and join me over there. It's a really fun time. Full Moon Offering newsletter is my face and body care remedies, and we are almost sold out of all of these lovely remedies that I've made for you guys this month. I've got just a few of each left. So if you are interested in trying them out, you can head to the website, as always, michelleshealinghome.com. And up on the screen, we have my current menu as well. So speaking of elder, as we talked about today with Saturn, elderberry and reishi syrup is still available. I've got 3 bottles left, so you can snag some of that up if you're interested in that. And announcing, which I'm very excited to announce, I have a handbook for herbal and natural cat care coming out.
Yeah.
And we're actually going to complete everything, and it's going to be available tonight on the website. But I've been working on this for a while. It's been in the works, and I cannot wait to share it with people. And Mario has been a big help and support of me doing this. It's something that I've wanted to do for a while, and it's now out. So I've compiled all of my experience, best to my knowledge, of what I've done in the past for our cat Carl, and all the things I've learned about herbal and natural cat care along the way, and bringing it to you all you cat lovers out there, so that you can have some alternatives to help your furry friends out a little bit more.
So yeah, check that out.
Yeah.
So definitely, we're going to be uploading it tonight, but tomorrow,
yeah,
people can give it a go.
Yeah, I would say
if they're interested.
Tomorrow, if you're interested, it'll be definitely up on the website for sale. Next Full Moon Offering newsletter is coming out on the 25th of January. So that's how you will be able to find out what I have coming down the pipeline. And you can sign up for my newsletter on my website, michelleshealinghome.com, and go to the newsletter tab. And if you sign up, then it's just the best way to keep in contact and also know what I have available, because I typically make small batches, and I do that consistently every month. So sometimes I run out of things, but then sometimes I restock it. But on the newsletter, you'll know everything that I've got available. Next week on the Healing Home, I have Jenny of Mi Casita Herbs, whom I'm very excited to talk to. And actually, I haven't known Jenny personally, but I've known her through Instagram and also Tippecanoe Herbs, because I know that she, I'm pretty sure she works at Tippecanoe, but she also has her own herbal business that she runs in Milwaukee, Mi Casita Herbs. And so we are going to get down and chat about her. I'm going to get to know her a little bit better and introduce her to the Healing Home community and audience. That will be next week on Tuesday, the 16th at 3 p.m. We'll be 1 hour earlier than normal, so 3 p.m. Pacific Standard Time. Me and Jenny will be talking. And tomorrow I have a second Crow 777 radio episode that's coming out, and it's all about herbal and natural pet and cat care. So that also was an inspiration for me to get this PDF going and out there and finalized, because this episode is going to be dropping tomorrow. So if you want to hear more about the conversation we had about caring for pets naturally with herbs and the experiences that Crow and Jason and Rose have also had with their own pets, because they're all animal lovers themselves. So that'll be a really lovely episode. I'm looking forward to that one dropping. So that'll be coming out tomorrow. And you'll be able to listen to that, listen to the first hour, but also listen to the full 2 hours if you're a member of Crow777radio.com.
And we're going to be on Interverse tomorrow.
Yes.
Talking about Elder.
Yep. For the Capricorn season, Chance reached out to see if we wanted to just do an Elder chat. And, it's hard to resist. It's hard to resist Elder and Capricorn and all these Saturnian things. So we're going to jump on with the Astro Herbs crew. So me, Mario, Slick will be there, Kyle of Tippy Canoe, and of course Chance himself will be there as well. So that will be at 5 p.m. Pacific Standard Time tomorrow on the Interverse podcast for Vibrant.
Yeah, that'll be fun.
Mm-hmm.
And then you guys can find my stuff, once again, symbolicstudies.com. If you're interested in a reading, I've got study packets available, $5. Got more stuff in the pipeline coming your way. So subscribe to my YouTube if you haven't, all that fun stuff.
Yes, on Instagram as well. He's now on, you've always been on Twitter, but you've been having more of a presence on Twitter lately.
Totally, yeah. So I paid for a premium account on Twitter, and so now I can actually post my videos, because beforehand they only let you have I can't remember, a minute, 20 seconds or something. So most of my videos are way beyond that. And so even right now we're on Twitter. So because of that,
which is pretty exciting.
Yeah, totally. So people are noticing more on there.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Well, cool. Awesome. And that will conclude episode 57 of The Healing Home. Thank you again, Bub.
Yeah. You got it. This was fun.
This was great. And I hope it sparked some thoughts for y'all out there and help you to maybe look at Saturn a little differently and to do your own research and come to your own conclusions, because that's what it's all about, really.
Yeah. I agree.
Alrighty, y'all. Well, until next time.
All right, guys.
Take care out there.
Have a good one.
We'll see you soon.
Bye-bye.
Bye.